Just do it before you die.
Come on, man, don't upset the man in the sky. Hey, we're back. Oh, thank God. Now we can finally get back to the exorcism collab.
Yeah, well, we also believe we have an angel assigned to us, a guardian angel. That angel has a lot of power, but the more you acknowledge the angel and ask for his help, the more power he can give you.
Isn't this so much better than being in the dregs with the Zoomers and the Steveses?
Oh, right. This is what we were doing. You know, I think I left my scarf back in the depth. I'll be right back.
I don't remember Eseth having a scarf. Eseth, where are you going?
This is much better.
Eseth, go back upstairs. I don't want to come across another teenage Christian spouting nonsense at me again. What if redeemed Zoomer is still around?
Oh, come on. That was just coincidence. Everyone knows the Christian Zoomer types are just super rare down here.
Do I want to know what's common down here?
And if you want to disbelieve in a miracle, again, you have to first disbelieve in God, because you can't use a miracle as a reason to disbelieve in God.
Oh, the non-Christian ones, of course.
These are 23 criticisms of the Quran that you've probably heard from almost every single anti-Islamic apologist.
An apologist is someone who defends a position. And I'm not defending the position of anti-Islam, though I guess in a roundabout way you could say I would do that under different circumstances. But what I'm doing, really, is attacking Islam. That is why I am not an apologist. I'm being offensive, not defensive. Which is not to say my goal is to offend, though if that happens, all the better. I suppose that means you could call me an anti-apologist for Islam, but that's getting quite wordy at this point, and I think I'm best summed up as being a critic. Now, this is a really nitpicky and minor point, so why did I even bother bringing it up? I brought it up because, despite it being minor, it nevertheless annoys me. By calling your opponents apologists, you are rhetorically painting them with the same brush that you have painted yourself. Look at us, we're all just engaging in apologetics of one form or another. This is the kind of rhetorical strategy used by charlatans who want to conflate their weak positions with their opponent's strong positions. Not that I'm saying you're doing that.
Oh boy. 5 seconds in and already we're getting confrontational, eh? I'm sorry, but I am gonna start with a compliment. Because as a first-generation immigrant, I can see from the get-go that that guy puts in a lot of effort to fit in. And I find it absolutely great. I know that that is a bit of a contentious sort of thing to say, especially to people who have never had to change countries and so are utterly oblivious to what that means, but it is something to be really, really proud of if you manage it. And to make it more clear to what it means, I am gonna explain it with clovers. Yes, you heard me right. Clovers. Especially the variety with white flowers. Now, of course, people living in Texas or other southern US states, they might not necessarily know what sort of plant this is. They might be thinking of a different kind of clover, but it is extremely common in the north of North America and obviously in Canada. It's a very hardy plant and one that is both good for the soil and for the local bees. Its scientific name is Trifolium, which as one would expect is a Latin name. Except it's also its original name. Or at least one of them, because that plant comes originally from Europe. It is in fact an invasive species, as is dandelion. Now, clover is of course one of those invasive species that aren't really that harmful. As mentioned before, it repairs nutrient-poor soil and it offers food for local bees. However, there are invasive species that are not as harmless. The Cryphonectria parasitica, for example, is a fungus that comes originally from East Asia, and it was introduced to North America in the early 20th century, traveling on a Japanese chestnut tree. Within only 30 years, this fungus nearly completely eradicated the American chestnut tree, with a few very, very sparse exceptions of the trees who were lucky enough or shielded enough to not get infected. The US biosystem is changing drastically as we speak, with native plants often losing to the newcomer species and getting decimated, if not eventually completely eradicated. This phenomenon doesn't just happen with species, of course, but also with dogmas and culture. One of the most extreme examples is, of course, communism, which spread from Germany all the way to China, where within less than a few generations it turned the entire culture on its head, to the point where only a husk of the original culture is still present. Another more commonly cited instance is, of course, the spread of Christianity in North America, which, just as in the case of the chestnut tree, borderline eradicated the local culture. Unfortunately, holding a place like Britain responsible for it may feel emotionally satisfying, but it is very misguided. Because most of Europe too was forcibly converted to Christianity less than a millennium earlier, which caused a near total eradication of its original cultures. As an immigrant into North America, these sorts of thoughts are very personal to me. I arrived here because I want to become part of the place. I want to participate in it, and I do not want to participate in the propagation of invasive ideas or behavior that is undermining it. And so the preservation of my new home's species, habits, and especially culture is very important to me, even if in some cases I find myself in disagreement with them. And when I saw this YouTuber we're replying to, I noticed a very similar behavior. The guy, for example, has a Polish name. He pronounces it Polish too. He doesn't refer to himself as Jan Rykowski, but instead he pronounces it as Jan Ryczkowski. So not only do I bet that he's likely constantly struggling with either having people mispronouncing his name or misspelling it, but like me, he probably also has been raised with the odd dish, habit or idea that may not really be considered stereotypically British. Because how could they be? However, he seems to have a very similar take to local cultures as I do. He seems to have a lot of respect for it. He has adopted the local ways to a point where he is borderline outbreeding Sye Ten, the guy he is responding to, which I personally find absolutely great. He replies to his fellow Brit in British open discussion fashion with a British-esque accent, and of course having already joined the predominant British religion, namely Islam.
All of these that I'm going to talk about today come from this video in particular by Sye Ten and the Rationalizer, and it's called The Sound of Muslims. This is a song that satirically states many so-called errors in the Quran that basically makes our entire religion sound like a joke.
Much of what the song is doing is drawing attention to the ridiculousness of the miracles presented within the Quran. Now, if an outsider finds your religion's miracles ridiculous, what you need to do is explain why it is that belief in these miracles isn't ridiculous. And that's a tall order. Convincing someone outside of your religion that the miracle claims of your religion are true probably involves a lot of the presentation of evidence, and I don't think you have any evidence. Which I guess I really didn't need to say. If I thought you had evidence, I would already be Muslim, and I'm not Muslim. But I will change my mind if you can in fact present me evidence.
But yeah, today I'm just going to go through every single one by one. And yeah, I'm just going to explain and refute all of the errors that he made in this song. Now, obviously, because music is haram, I used AI to remove the instrumental from this song. So the only thing you'll hear today is the lyrics.
And because I consider music and free expression way more important than following the dictates of a religion I find silly, I'm going to edit the music back in. Plus, I really like this song.
Anyways, this is going to be a really long video, so if you have a prayer coming up, please just, save this video for another time.
Allah, it's me, Anti-Sleeper. I know we've not talked in a while, but if I could give you one prayer, please, let this guy have an interesting argument. Could I get one novel argument throughout this entire video? Please and thank you. Love you.
Otherwise, grab some popcorn, grab some dates, or whatever.
Dude, just so you know, you gotta be super careful with those dates. I bought a bunch of those dried ones just a while ago, and they were so fermented that they got me tipsy. You should definitely not eat those before prayer, because you will totally regret it. Don't do it.
Get some water to stay hydrated, and yeah, let's get into it. It's gonna be a very long video.
God, you don't know the half of it.
Let's go on to the first verse.
Talking hands, talking feet, ears that talk too. Talking flesh and eyes bear witness against you.
Alright, so here the writer is referencing Surah An-Nur verse 24 and Surah Fusilat verse 20, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that our body parts, so our hands, eyes, skin, etc., will all testify against us truthfully on the Day of Judgment. The ears will say what we listened to willingly, the mouth will say what we said, the eyes will say what we looked at, and so on. Now, this happens on Yawm al-Qiyamah, or the Day of Judgment, and of course it happens after death and after the end of the universe. And obviously, because it happens after death, in presumably a completely different dimension, saying that this is unrealistic is completely useless.
So you can't justifiably say something is unrealistic if it occurs in a different dimension. You know, I gotta give it to Allah. He did deliver me an interesting argument. I was not expecting that one. It's a terrible argument, but, you know, it was interesting.
It doesn't mean anything because this happens on the Day of Judgment.
This is absolutely fascinating. I mean, just think about the implications of that. You have a person living a life, presumably having a normal body that renews body cells every so often, like you would expect. And that, of course, also includes the cells of your hand, your feet, and about everything in between. So throughout your life, you go through several cell iterations, which you either shed, like the case of the skin, or poop out, like in the case of the blood cells. And all of those cells then get reshuffled back into the life cycle of Earth in one way or another. Maybe they're eaten by a fly, which then gets eaten by a frog, which then gets eaten by a Frenchman, who then turns your cell into another hand cell. Either way, that cell is busy for a long, long, long time. From the point you start until the universe decides to out-universe itself, at least. And at that point, then, what? What happens to your 50 shades of hand that you have shedded over the years? How exactly do they bear witness against you? Are they all individually sentient all of a sudden? Do they have souls? Do they have a collective memory? Like a Borg-style sort of thing? And how do you prevent the cells you pooped out from getting jealous of the cells that you shed? And making your sins out to be far, far worse than they actually were, just out of revenge. But that is just one facet of it. What gets even more fascinating than the talking hands and feet is your response. You basically just shrug it off and go, oh well, it all happens in another dimension, so reality doesn't apply. And I get why that is convenient for an apologist to say that, because it shuts down the conversation. But to anyone who is genuinely curious, it is absolutely not compelling. It is like when you come home one day with lipstick on your neck and your wife asks where that comes from, and all you say is, oh, that spontaneously appeared from another dimension, nothing to worry about. I mean, it is technically a response. It's just not one that anyone without a gold medal in gullibility would be eager to buy.
And if you want to disbelieve in this, that's your choice, but disbelieving in something completely metaphysical that's gonna happen after the end of the universe makes no sense, because for that you have to first disbelieve in the rest of Islam. And this cannot be used as a proof or a criticism against Islam, because this is completely miraculous and metaphysical, and it's completely impossible to prove or disprove that this will happen.
Ah, I take it back. This was in fact not an interesting argument. This was merely Jan saying, you can't disbelieve my unfalsifiable premise. Well, from my perspective, I can't do anything but disbelieve unfalsifiable premises, unless I want to end up as a writhing mass of philosophical contradictions. I guess I could curate the list of unfalsifiable premises I accept to only the ones that make me feel good, or only the ones that were taught to me by my society, but in that case, I would be engaging in special pleading. Now, what does that text say? The only way to prove this to be true is by proving that Islam is true. No, that doesn't work at all. I mean, for one, let's consider that if you remove all of the unfalsifiable claims from Islam, how much of Islam do you have left? These unfalsifiable claims are part of Islam, and they cannot be proven to be true. Therefore, at least that much of Islam cannot be proven to be true. Maybe you're saying we should accept the unfalsifiable claims of Islam as true if we agree that the rest of Islam is true. And that is an absolutely abysmal strategy of determining what is true about the world. If someone tells me a bunch of true things, grass is green, the sky is blue, politicians are scumbags, etc., I'm not suddenly going to identify them as a truthful person and then believe every claim they tell me from that point onward. So not only can you not demonstrate that Islam is true, but even if you demonstrated that most of Islam is true, that would still not be a reason to accept the claims that are unfalsifiable.
Next line.
Dissected birds fly home to Abraham. It's all written here in the noble Quran.
So this one's referring to Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 260, where Ibrahim alayhi salam asked Allah to show him how he gives life to the dead. And Allah asked him, don't you already believe? And Abraham said yes, but he only asks so that his heart may be satisfied. And what this means is that he wants to be 1,000,000,000% sure that this is the truth.
Say that again.
He wants to be 1,000,000,000% sure that this is the truth. He wants to be 1,000,000,000% sure that this is the truth.
In other words, there's precedent for people not taking everything on faith. If Abraham needed some evidence that the God can resurrect the dead, and was granted it, why would it be unreasonable for an atheist to ask for proper evidence either? Rather than, being waved off and told that the book says so. Just asking.
He wanted to have complete trust that this is the true religion, because when you actually know or believe something to be true without even the smallest doubt, the dawah you can give and the conviction you have is completely unmatched. So Allah commanded him to get 4 birds and to train them to come back to him, how they would do with messenger pigeons and stuff. Allah then commanded him to slaughter these 4 birds and to place their body parts on 4 different hills. Then Allah commanded him to call them again, and the little filleted bits started to run towards him and come together. Now obviously it doesn't take a genius to say that this is unrealistic. Personally, I've never seen my fillet chicken running or even walking for that matter. But that's literally the point. This event was used by Allah to show Abraham that he is omnipotent and that Islam is the true religion. And for this to work, it obviously has to be a miracle, which by definition is something that is scientifically impossible according to our observable laws of the universe. So disbelief in this relies on disbelief in God.
Atheists do not believe in a God. Nada. 0. Error 404. Deus not found. So when atheists critique your miracles, you telling them that would imply there is no God does not help your cause. It just makes them go, duh. Obviously. Of course, we knew that. We're there already. Because that is exactly what they believe. From their perspective, you're basically telling them that if they believe miracles are woo-woo, then the other woo-woo is also woo-woo. You're not debunking them, you're making their point for them.
If you think this is unrealistic, that is literally the point. But using this as a reason to not believe in God is circular reasoning.
Whoa. Where is the circular reasoning here? Because I must have missed it. Let me see if I can puzzle this together somehow. So, if miracles aren't scientifically proven, then they're not real. And if they're not real, then God is neither. Is that the circular reasoning? I mean, first of all, it would be stupid reasoning, because evidence of miracles is not evidence for a God. And you could, for example, have a God who can't perform miracles, or you could have non-scientifically provable miracles, but scientifically provable evidence of a God. You could also have miracles that generate spontaneously and no God at all. But secondly, at no point does the circle get closed. It doesn't jump from God doesn't exist back to therefore miracles aren't scientifically proven. That is not a thing. Now, I don't know what went on in Sye Ten's head, but if I were him, what I would think is the following. They believe in this book. This book has all this weird wacky stuff in it. Not only do they say that their wacky ideas can't be proven, but in some cases they also use the one unproven wacky idea to prove another unproven wacky idea, and then are absolutely shocked if you don't buy into either. And once you get to that point, showcasing the wackiness of it all becomes somewhat recreational. Now, maybe I misunderstood your reasoning, so correct me if it is so, but if not, then your idea of circular reasoning, or reasoning in general, might need a bit of a rehaul.
If you think this is unrealistic, that is literally the point. But using this as a reason to not believe in God is circular reasoning.
Why do you believe in miracles? I'm going to take a stab at it and say you believe in miracles because they are written within the Quran, what you consider to be God's divinely inspired word. Why do you consider the Quran to be God's divinely inspired word? because you believe the testimony of the people whom the Quran is written by and about, people like Muhammad and Ibrahim. And what does their testimony entail? Accounts of miracles. This is a circle. Also, you can believe in God, yet not believe in the truth of every miracle claim. For instance, I have a miraculous 12-foot metaphysical cock. I keep it in the backyard and feed it the souls of aborted babies. Do you believe me? Probably not. Does your disbelief in my 12-foot metaphysical cock impact the degree to which you are confident God exists? Also probably not. Now, not only is it likely that you disbelieve that I have a 12-foot soul-eating metaphysical cock, it's also likely that you believe I don't have it, because it is overwhelmingly more likely that this is just something I made up. That's how I feel about Islam.
Next one.
The earth existed before there were stars.
Alright, this one's referring to verses 10 to 12 of Surah Fussilat. And it's also mentioned in verse 29 of Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah says that He formed the earth, placed mountains on it, and then He formed the heaven into the 7 heavens. Now, of course, with the English translation, it sounds like the earth was created first and then the heavens, right? But you actually don't hear this from Arabic speakers, because Arabic speakers know that the word then here is thumma in Arabic. And thumma is a very complex word. If you want a full Arabic lesson on the word thumma, just click this card here. But basically, thumma is not just used chronologically, right? It doesn't just mean I did this, then I did that. It's also used to indicate rank, importance, or relevance, right?
I've given a listen and a watch to the video you linked, and it basically says exactly what you have already mentioned, which is that while thumme is mostly used as a time indicator, it can also be used, for example, in rankings or listings and so on. For example, you could use thumme to say something like, there is the pilot, then there is the co-pilot, then there is the flight attendant, then there is the passenger, and so on. Now, of course, I am not an expert in Proto-Semitic and its derivative languages, far from it, and so I'll just take your word and this guy's word for it, for the sake of argument. But there is a little catch to this whole issue. You see, while I don't know whether or not you could use thumme to say something like, there's the pilot, then the co-pilot, then the flight attendant, then the passenger, I know for certain that you can use the word then to say something like, there's the pilot, then the co-pilot, then the flight attendant, then the passenger. And in the video you linked, the presenter did also acknowledge that thumme is indeed mostly used for time. In other words, nothing you have said about the word thumme disqualifies Sye Ten's take on it. The problem here is not the translation. It is not the word then. The problem is that you and Sye Ten have a different interpretation of the exact same text. Kind of like you have a young Earth creationist and an old Earth creationist who look at the same text and just give it a different spin. And while your take is perfectly valid, especially if you squint and squeeze and twist your head a bit, Sye Ten's take is just as valid. You may reject it, but you did not falsify it.
So the order of these verses and the order of these parts of verses doesn't necessarily mean that the first one happened before the next one. It could just be that the first thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says was more relevant or more important than the next thing. And it is true that the formation of the earth is more important to us than the formation of the heavens. And this is in conjunction with the views of many of the early mufassirun. Additionally, if you look at the wording in Surah Al-Baqarah, you'll also see that Allah didn't create the 7 heavens. He formed the heaven into the 7 heavens, which could have happened after the creation of the earth. We don't know that. But the predominant interpretation is the first one that I just mentioned.
So the most widely accepted interpretation of this passage is that it says, the earth is more important to humans than the stars are. To which I would reply, no shit. I mean, putting aside things like the earth not existing were it not for stars, we live on earth and do not live in the stars. Yet now that the universe has been established, we care about Earth and not about stars. Maybe with the exception of the sun, which we need in order to continue being alive. This is not revelatory, this is trivial. I actually find the inclusion of such a pointless passage to be more damning to the notion that the Quran is divinely inspired than the claim that the earth was created first. At least with that, you can hand-wave it away as a miracle that God merely hid the evidence for, like you do with everything else. But the passage with the prevailing interpretation, that's just wasted ink.
Anyways, next one.
The moon emits light and was split into parts.
Alright, this one's referring to Surah Nuh, verse 16, where Allah says that He made the moon a light and the sun a burning lamp. And He uses two different Arabic words here. For the moon He uses nuran, which is translated as light, and for the sun He uses sirajan, or lamp. Because the sun does indeed emit its own light, so there's no problem in that.
Nope, no problem at all. No issues at all. Other than maybe the fact that it's not a lamp.
But the issue is with the word nuran. Of course, this dude thinks that this is referring to the moon emitting its own light, but obviously we know that's not true because the moon reflects the light of the sun. Now, the word nuran is actually used in two different ways here. Firstly, a different Arabic word is used to differentiate between the nature of the sun's light and the moon's light. So the interpretation of this verse is not limited to one where the moon emits its own light, because the word nuran doesn't specifically imply that the light is being emitted.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but Nuran is also a name, usually one for girls. And in that context, it pretty much ubiquitously is referred to as radiant and glowing, which of course would make sense for a name. If you have a radiant daughter, why not call her Radiant? Sort of like we have the name Phoebe, which is Greek and also means radiant and bright. Or we have the name Chiara, which is an Italian name that means bright and luminous, or by extension, radiant. Now, radiant is usually understood to be a rather light-emitting sort of word. But hey, we're all reasonable people here, and so I'm perfectly fine with interpreting Nuran as reflection, if that is how you want to interpret the word. But only if in turn you are perfectly fine with arguing that all these girls who are called Nuran are in fact not called radiant, but reflective. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Siraj a name too? Now, of course, if it refers to the sunlight, that makes perfect sense. Who wouldn't want the sunny sun? But why the hell would you call your kid a lamp? What's wrong with people? What other whiskey names will they come up with next? Carpet, table, futon, TV station? That's madness!
Furthermore, the word Nuran has been used in different ways in the Quran. Most often it's been used as a way to describe a light of guidance. So in this verse, it refers to the Quran as being a light of guidance, and in this verse, it referred to the revelations that Musa alayhi salam received. So because Nuran is often translated as a light of guidance, some say that Surah Nuh is also referring to the moon as being a light of guidance, because it helps people to take track of the time, especially for us Muslims and the people of Musa's time, because we all use lunar calendars.
So some say the moon and the Quran and Revelations are a metaphorical light. I have two problems with this. Firstly, metaphors are an easy way for modern peoples to explain away errors committed by past peoples. Yeah, we don't know exactly what these ancient people were saying, but one interpretation makes them sound scientifically illiterate, which by all accounts they were, and another interpretation makes them sound poetic and deep. So, let's go with that one. My second problem is, you don't actually say what you say. You don't give your interpretation of the event. Now, if some people interpret the passage as being metaphorical, some others must be interpreting the passage as being literal. And since you aren't taking a stand, I am inferring an unwillingness on your part to call those people wrong. Which you don't have to do, I suppose, but your unwillingness to do so does come off as cowardly. You know, now that I think about it, you've not only abstained from stating your position on whether the emitted light is literal or metaphorical, but you've also abstained from taking a position on whether the light itself is emitted or reflected. You started off this section describing how Nuran could have been used to differentiate between emitted light and reflected light, and how the moon's light would have been reflected. So if it could also mean light of guidance, is the light of guidance reflected? Is this going to be a theme going forward, where you present to us a spattering of mutually exclusive yet equally unsubstantiated interpretations, not pick one, and then just leave your platter of hollow options on the table as if you had said something compelling? Yes, you can, post hoc, conceive of interpretations wherein the moon is not literally emitting light. Can you give me a reason to think that's what the authors meant? They might have thought the moon was a metaphorical guiding light. They might have known that the moon was a reflection of the sun's light. Or they might have thought the moon was emitting light. Why shouldn't I think they intended to communicate that last one? Well, that would have made them wrong, and you don't want them to be wrong.
And the next one, the moon was split in two parts. This is referring to verse 1 of Surah Al-Qamar, where Allah plainly states that the moon was split in two. And this is of course in reference to the time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala split the moon in half to convince the Sahaba and the disbelievers that Islam is the truth. So again, this was a miracle, just like the cut birds from earlier. And this was used to strengthen the belief of the people who already believed, and of course to also make the disbelievers believe. So people often see this and first they say, oh, I don't believe in miracles, but some do actually give it the benefit of the doubt and they say, okay, sure, miracles can happen, but then they ask for historical evidence. And this is where the main argument that people bring against this is. So the main argument that people put up against this is that there are no historical records outside of Islamic ones that can confirm this. But yeah, the reason for this is simple. If the moon was seen splitting in other parts of the world, people could easily take credit for it. You know, they could say, oh, I did that, I'm God, I'm the prophet, you know, whatever. They could have done that, right? You know, people who lived a few countries away wouldn't be able to link it to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It would just be impossible and it would lead to mass confusion. So it's believed that the moon could have just been made to appear normal to everyone.
Meaning what? He made a bunch of people hallucinate that it didn't split while it actually split? At that point, why not have a handful of people hallucinating that it did split, while not moving a finger to actually split it, and saving the time and effort to deal with the problems it causes later? I mean, you would think that someone capable of creating a universe would be smart enough to understand a minimum of the concept of work optimization. Technically.
Or alternatively, it could have just been covered up with clouds or a thunderstorm. It could have also been late at night where most people are asleep.
Are you seriously telling me that every speck of Earth on which the moon was visible had it late at night at the same time?
And those who weren't asleep probably just thought they were tripping balls and
See, I warned them not to eat too many dates. I totally... Anyway, the idea that there might not be much written evidence is certainly possible. A lot of contemporary texts of historic events have been lost throughout the years. For example, the only known eyewitness account for the volcanic eruption destroying Pompeii was noted down by a historian called Tacitus, who got his information from a letter sent to him by Pliny the Younger 25 years after the actual incident. If not for them, we wouldn't have any written information about that incident. Well, except we would still have information, of course, because we still have the town and the people preserved in the ash. In other words, the lack of witnesses didn't stop us from finding out more about it. In your case, however, we have the Quran claiming this incident occurred, but we don't have any real-world evidence for it whatsoever. For example, imagine there were pictures from the satellites that showed us the moon's surface with a big fat crack through the entire thing, top to bottom. It wouldn't necessarily prove the story, but it would definitely support it, rather than falsifying it. We also don't really seem to have any other signs of it on Earth from that time. What about, for example, craters that came from the potential debris that could have come loose and fallen to Earth during the splitting? We have no mention of weird odd and ebb flow behavior of the ocean around that time, and we have nothing really. Nothing other than the say-so of a book. And since you mentioned tripping, let me ask you again. Why would you assume that a much smaller group was the one witnessing something real and everyone else was tripping instead of the other way around?
I mean, the moon split in half and then it came back together again. There was no consequences or anything. It just happened, so there's not much reason for someone to preserve a document about that.
I will be shocked if there's a less compelling argument presented within the rest of this video, because this one is just so bad. Fascination with celestial bodies is commonplace the world over and throughout history. And you think the moon splitting in half would not have garnered significant attention? If you don't think that would have been considered a remarkable event by people at the time, why do you think God would have used it as a miracle in order to demonstrate his power? If you witnessed the moon being split in half, but the event was not prefaced by God or one of his prophets describing it as a divine miracle, would you consider it unremarkable? You are profoundly uncurious.
Another great argument is that logically, if the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a fake prophet, why would he make this big rumor? He would know that people wouldn't believe it if it didn't actually happen, right?
Are you kidding me? Have you ever in your life left your little dogmatic kiddie pool? We have people who believe that the earth is flat, that the moon is fake, that the stars are space cities, that politicians are lizard people. They might have a bit of a point. That babies violate the conservation of mass, that caves are petrified vaginas of giants, that demons watch you pee when you go to toilet with the wrong foot, that God made the Holocaust so that he can have a horror movie to watch. That one came from a rabbi, mind you. And that there are plasma portals in the Vatican, human angel being cyborgs, koalas being fake, your butthole being darker because it's meant to absorb sunlight. And these are merely the ones I'm coming up with from the top of my head. I've barely scratched the surface. I'm sorry to break it to you, puppy, but Muhammad wouldn't be the first, and he definitely wouldn't be the last, to get away with preaching bullshit.
How could he convince all the Sahaba and all the disbelievers that this happened? He couldn't have.
You did not witness the event, yet you seemingly believe it, in part, because of the grandiosity of the claim. So clearly, people can be convinced by grandiose claims they did not witness. You are actively explaining why your logic doesn't hold. Oh my god, I'm getting redeemed Zoomer flashbacks. Oh fuck, get me out. Get me out of here.
So yeah, there are many things that show that it is possible for the moon to have been split at one point.
Are there? Well, what are they? What are the many things? Because so far, you merely wave stuff off with, "It's a miracle," and "I don't believe he would lie to us." And that's about it. Those are not very compelling arguments. And you know, for the sake of argument, I could grant you everything under the sun right now. I could, for example, grant you that all these people saw the moon split, and that there is a God who made them see it in order to prove his own existence, and that he made the moon split for them, but not for the rest of the world. I could grant it all, and there would still be no evidence whatsoever on how exactly he would have done it. Why wouldn't the gods simply have made them hallucinate? They wouldn't know the difference. They can't check, can they? And so obviously they would have written down their hallucination as something real, not a tripping incident. Why wouldn't he have taken the easier route of simply letting them see things in their minds? In fact, why do we need a god at all? I'm pretty sure people are perfectly capable of tripping all by themselves. And they're perfectly capable of talking each other into wacky conspiracies too. Now, of course, most Muslims wouldn't be happy with that kind of explanation, because that would just not be that cool. But reality doesn't really care about fifis. And so when seeking the truth, maybe we shouldn't either.